Okay. Welcome, Emma Vallely. How are you doing?
Good, you got my surname right. That was actually very impressive.
The people usually say Vallely. Yeah.
Lily, or I get some Valerie. I don't know where the R comes from, but yeah, you got it right. We're all good.
There's actually a very famous skateboarder called Mike Vallely,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
he's made a thing of making sure that people get his name right, and so it's ingrained in me. So as soon as I saw it, I think Vallely and not Vallely. So skateboarders will get your name correct.
Fab.
That's a group you can rely on. Yeah.
I'll pretend I'm distantly related to him in some way. I'm sure I'm not, but I'll pretend.
Thank you first of all for making the time to be here. We're both in Scotland just now. The weather's fairly well, less than miserable, that's for sure.
It's
And
sunny.
so
Yeah.
it's sunny, and so there's extra bonus points for you actually joining us instead of being out and soaking up every last bit of vitamin D before the normal Scottish weather comes back. So bonus points for that. And you are well, so you're working with PVL. And well, this is a surname that I'll probably struggle with. So this is Petra. Is it Velzabor?
Belzebor. Yep.
Velzabor. Okay.
Yep.
And it's an organization that, if I understand, I mean, I was watching some of one of Petra's talks this morning, actually. It's her TED talk that she gave, and
Mm-hmm.
very much a personal organization, isn't it? It's very much, you talk about revolutionizing mental health in the workplace, but it's not like this kind of corporate feel. I mean, even everything down to Petra having her name and her personality kind of out front, and all of you guys sort of in the team seeming to be encouraged to share your stories and be authentic people and not have this kind of corporate wall, is quite an interesting organization that sort of seems to walk the talk, Before we kind of get into all of that, I just wondered how you got into this, because you came through this kind of business school background and then, sort of jumped to coaching and then into this world. And I just wondered how that happened. Was it a trajectory? Was there a moment where you were like, I want to go into this world? How did it happen? How did you actually arrive there?
Yeah, it is quite a mix, isn't it, for the last 5 years? Some of
Yeah.
it was intentional, some of it not at all. So yeah, kind of business school background, had then almost kind of fallen into the tech world. Like that was part of my placement year at uni, and then I just kind of continued in that space, and loads of that was amazing for me. That was very corporate background, but with tech, obviously it's a growing industry. You can go into so many areas. So yeah, it was a really great experience. And that's kind of how I found a little bit of the mental health stuff as well, because they had, as lots of organizations do, like the mental health awareness weeks and kind of the initiatives going on. And I'd asked to get involved in that. And kind of when you're in kind of bigger corporate companies, the great thing is you can get involved in lots of different projects outside of your role as well. So yeah, that was really great to get involved in that. But it became really apparent to me really quickly, even not having kind of the background in mental health, that the awareness days just weren't really enough. It just felt like they had a really great impact on, the days or the weeks that they happened. But for me, I was just questioning where's the momentum, and where's the everyday support, and where's the everyday initiatives that aren't just kind of a tick box. And there was also a bit of a gap with, I guess, leaders leading by example as well, it felt like. And we actually brought that into that year's mental health awareness week, kind of getting leaders to talk about their stories and share their experiences. And I just saw the really amazing ripple effect that had. So sort of stayed in that industry for a while, but when you get that voice at the back of your head just sort of niggling at you, going, there's something not quite fitting for me here. And it was just the fulfillment. I kept kind of coming back to, I'd spend my spare time kind of researching mental health at work and understanding what was out there. And we then hit lockdown, like the first ever lockdown. Everything about my job went remote, and that kind of voice just got louder and louder when you worked from home, just kind of going, okay, the fulfillment's just not there. And then I kind of got an opportunity to essentially leave that industry, and either go back into it in a different role, or kind of take a step back and go, what do I want to do? So felt like a much scarier step to take a step back and go,
Yeah.
I'm going to leave, I'm going to figure out what's next. And I didn't even know if anything like PVL existed. Like mental health at work really interested me, but I didn't have a clue what was out there, really. I couldn't find that much. It felt relatively new as a space or as an industry. Did a lot of networking, and as with a lot of members of our team, I think we chance came across Petra, had a conversation, and kind of just, as we often describe it in the team, like the planets just aligned. And as they were kind of growing the team, they were looking for someone with more of my background to come in and help the team from like a sales perspective and a client perspective. And it just, stars aligned. But it's been a long kind of journey of learning, because obviously my background wasn't originally in mental health. So it's been a couple of years of learning a lot. But it's been amazing.
It was a brave step for sure. I mean, I think that, did you ever see the No Wrong Path initiative? It pops up now and again. I'm a big fan of it, where they kind of highlight people who kind of have this sort of meandering path as they essentially start stripping back the surface of, what they're doing, and looking at the motivations underneath. So, we tend to sort of get into these roles of like, okay, I want to be in business. I don't, really understand why, but it's something that appeals to me, and you get drawn in to a sort of world. But there's, as you say, there's that voice, or there's that, there's something else that a window opens, and you see something else, and you think, wow, that's really sparked something in me. But the idea of that going from like an interest, you're researching mental health in your free time and thinking about it, to actually blooming into a new career path is a beautiful thing. And it's like it's something that I think should be modeled more often. People, there's so much fear around people changing careers, as if it's like you've got to start from square one again, when actually, you talk about the planets aligning. I mean, you're talking about really stepping into a more authentic path, and come what may, that's generally always going to be the right choice, right? I mean, do you feel like this is the world that you inhabit now? This is where you belong?
Yeah, and the great thing is it's growing as well. So in terms of like my particular role at the moment within our team, that can grow, but also in the space, it's growing a lot. Like mental health at work, for loads of reasons we'll go into today, is obviously growing as a subject and a need. So I think the industry generally is going to evolve, which is really exciting. It doesn't feel like you're sort of in a set role where that's what you're going to be. Like it's sort of that tick box that you inhabit. It feels like actually as a space you can keep growing in it, which is exciting. Yeah.
Why is it evolving? I mean, so we've got the pandemic, of course, which but what I'm curious about was, for change like this to happen, the pandemic, could perhaps act as a catalyst, but it must be catalyzing something pre-existing. The pandemic doesn't sort of suddenly appear and suddenly, out of nowhere, mental health is an issue. It always has been, but it's, what's your take on it? I mean, what has changed? Has it just been that the pandemic accelerated something that was already there? Was there already stuff shifting? Why is it that there weren't organizations like PVL out there, more visibly in the last few years? What has developed, and why do you think that's happened?
Yeah, so I think you're right. Like the pandemic was a catalyst. I often describe it as like a tipping point as well. There's a really good book called Tipping Point, but it was almost that tipping point for a couple of different things. It was a tipping point for looking at how we really address mental health at work and how important it is. And that's also because there was another tipping point of people really starting to struggle, and more openly struggle during the pandemic, and we were seeing more of that crisis end over the past 2 years. And that's a really important part of mental health to address, is the crisis end and the struggling end, and how do you support people and how do you signpost them. But really what we see is quite different in what we do, and what organizations are trying to do as well, is not just look at that crisis end. So that's a really important part where, how do you signpost someone that's really struggling? What's like the return to work process? What's all the conversations and the language you use around mental illness, around someone struggling. But there's kind of this gap there where a lot of organizations are learning how to do that, but they then don't really know what's next. So it's like, once someone's kind of over that crisis point, what's next? What do we do? And that's really where we want to come in and look at, actually, we don't just want to do the tick box mental health awareness days and kind of the, signposting someone to mental health first aid or to your employee assistance program. It's about, when someone's struggling, how do you move them back along to the thriving end? And how do we have, the uplifting conversations around mental health, not just the ones about struggling? And I think that's a lot of the stigma that's starting to move and starting to be shifted. But there's a lot of stigma around mental health essentially equaling mental illness. And I think we're all still learning that actually those aren't the same things. Mental health is something we all have, and it can be a really positive thing as well. You want to have mental health. And there's still a lot of misconceptions around, you can have a mental illness, but your mental health can be great, or you can, not be diagnosed with a mental illness, but you can be really struggling with your mental health at any given time. And that shifts all the time. Whereas a lot of organizations and just society have still got a bit of that stigma to overcome around, it's not just the struggling end, it's kind of this continuum that's constantly shifting.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, it's part of me thinks, okay, this is huge, it's complex, it's going to take an awful lot of time to change. But then there's another part that's like, there is a simplicity to it as well, that's just about saying that you can't, just saying like, okay, we're on a shared journey, let's figure this out together. That opening up to not having all the answers and not having the tick box solutions, as you say, so that, because that's quite a reactive mode, isn't it, to say, well, let's celebrate Mental Health Awareness Day, and let's we have a mental health first aider or an organization that you can talk to if you're in crisis. But it's like, how do we actually, build a culture that helps not prevent, but helps, support people in a way that they might not need to reach that point, rather than just reacting to things that are going on. And I wanted to get your take on this, because you mentioned a few times about openness and about people openly struggling. And what would you say about the sort of leadership aspect here? Because to me, this has always it's always come from the top in my organization, in my experience. If the leadership, or, and I don't mean hierarchically, but the people who are influential in the organization are able to have conversations and reveal a little bit of vulnerability about themselves, that kind of permission giving for the rest of the team to just almost drop their shoulders and say, yeah, me too. Do you think that it's all on the leadership, or, I mean, what's the kind of, what's the keystone of the bridge here? What is the fundamental thing that's got to be tackled if you're talking about, really starting to build a culture? Does it come from the top, or?
Yeah, so I think a huge part of it needs to come from the top, in terms of leaders leading by example. It's a huge piece of what we see when we work with organizations. If there's a lot of people struggling, if there's a lot of people going off with stress or burnout, what we will immediately look at is, are your leaders leading by example? Are they having the conversations? And it's, like you said earlier, it's not about these huge complex steps. And I think for leaders, a lot of the conversations we have with them, there's a huge fear there of, it's mental health. And the kind of pushback we sometimes get at the start is leaders saying, oh, well, I don't have mental health, that doesn't really affect me. Whereas actually it's about just being able to support them as humans as well, because actually it can feel quite scary. And also leaders are people as well, and we need to remember that. So, it's very important that they lead by example, but it's about equipping them so that they can, because that can feel like such a strange alien area if you've kind of spent the entirety of your life and your career so far and not talking about mental health. You've maybe moved up in an organization because you were good at your role, and now you're expected to kind of support a team during a pandemic or at any time. Can feel quite scary. So I think it's very much for us speaking to leaders about that. It's looking at actually, how do you take the really simple steps to to support a mentally healthy culture. And that's not about, these big awareness days and kind of pushing all this information. It's actually about, we model it in our team all the time. It's very much about, how do you ask the really simple, actionable questions? Like in our team meetings, we'll always have this huge culture of leading by example. So someone might ask, it's something very simple, like, how's your mental health been today? But what's really important is whichever leader or person is asking that, they'll go first in answering it. Because, if you're asking someone that in like a team setting without kind of answering it first yourself, you're kind of putting it out to the team without any real vulnerability. And that's quite hard for a team to kind of know where they stand and know how to answer the question. Whereas, for us, if we're saying, how's your mental health today? Okay, I'll go first. Actually, I think it's quite hard this week, but actually this has been really great this week and I might be struggling with this. You suddenly create this huge level of psychological safety in the team for them to go, oh, I'm actually allowed to really say how I feel because, my manager or that leader has actually answered the question first. So it's just really important, but small steps that make a huge difference. Because if you're doing that every day and every week, then those big mental health awareness days, they actually have so much more of an impact because people have seen the culture growing over the whole year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can almost be used to celebrate milestones rather than be tokenistic. I mean, it's like you say, you could reinterpret them. It's like, this is something we do every day. But I wonder, I mean, do you think there must be a huge amount of fear around this for leaders, and I wonder where it comes from. If it's this old idea of strength, a misconception of what strength and bravery are, that you can't talk about weakness as it's perceived, any kind of, these words, frailty, and fragility, and that have so much associations that really don't help. Even in cultures as well that have this kind of, higher power distance index, so having worked in Latin America and things, I've seen that the distance between the CEO and the next level down, they're very isolated. And I wonder, I mean, how, when you come in to work with a leader who perhaps, I mean, I imagine there's a little bit of an in, because if you're there in the room in the first place, there's an acknowledgement that they might need help, or some kind of guidance. But what I find is that sometimes leaders don't think it's for themselves, it's for my team. And I'm okay, but it's for my team. How do you start with those conversations about, do you start by addressing what their conceptions of strength and bravery and courage and things are? Do you start by actually encouraging them to share? I mean, how do you get over that first hurdle? Because you must have been in this situation, I'm sure.
So it's a hard one. Oh, I think I've lost you.
Okay, you can still hear me. Carry on. Let's see if it comes back.
So it is. It's a big challenge of, like we were saying, if as a leader you've been kind of taught that vulnerability equals weakness your whole life, it's a hard kind of shift to overcome and a hard stigma to overcome. So we go in and we do a lot of leadership training, and part of that is looking at, the return on investment of investing in proactive mental health support, speaking the language of, what as an organization and as a person do you actually get back from this? But part of it is also looking at the skills like empathy, vulnerability, creating psychological safety and trust, and kind of getting them to practice that as leaders in a safe space. And, for us, when we're training, we will role model that as well, so that they can understand the powerful shift that can have. But it's also about helping them to see it from the employee's perspective. So, if as a leader, you believe that, you've got all this pressure on you, your role is to put a brave face on, kind of put a mask on, kind of get on with things. What you're essentially teaching everyone in your team and everyone, in the rest of the organization is that essentially to get to your level, they need to be like you, they need to act like you. So, you're teaching employees that to get to that leadership level, they need to already be practicing putting that mask on and pretending they're okay. Otherwise, they're never going to get to that level. Whereas if they're seeing leaders actually leading by example and showing vulnerability and asking these questions. And even something really simple like, when we do leadership training and we ask, what are you doing to invest in your mental health? And they tell us, oh, I do this, I run, or I meditate, or I, whatever they do. We sort of ask them, well, have you shared that with your team before? And they say, well, no, I've never really thought about it. And it's even just simple things like that, just sharing what you do as a human being to look after your mental health. It just makes you a lot more human. It makes the culture a lot more human. And you're showing your team that, okay, actually to move up to that level or to achieve, I don't need to pretend everything's fine. I don't need to keep whichever mask I'm wearing on. I can take it off and kind of show up as my authentic self. So it's just these really simple steps that, for leaders aren't always about going to the crisis end and talking about the struggling aspects. It's always proactive changes and really uplifting conversations that make a huge difference. And you asked earlier about, is it just on leaders as well? And I would say it's definitely not. We talk about this balance between personal responsibility and organizational responsibility. So, you can have the most supportive leaders and the most mentally healthy culture, but some people are still going to struggle. Some people might not be looking after their own mental health enough. And again, we try and model that in our team. So one of the questions we kind of ask each other most weeks is, how are you investing in your mental health today? And can we keep you accountable for that? So, it's up to us as individuals to really prioritize our own mental health. And, we're seeing it with people working remotely a lot more, being able to set boundaries in place and go, okay, I'm switching off at this time. That's my boundary. That's what I'm doing. That's up to individuals as well as the organization. You kind of can't have all or nothing on both sides.
That I find that fascinating, because it's what I was really curious to hear was the sort of the initial phases, the small steps, how you begin the shift in that kind of patterning in an organization. And I love that idea about, I think it's pretty common these days when you ask somebody how they take care of their own mental health or how they invest in it, that a lot of people, more people than before, for sure, more people than even 10 years ago, will have an answer that does go something like, okay, I take a moment in the morning, or I do X and Y. But actually moving to, do you share that with others, is such a simple step that just opens the door to a more authentic human relationship, that and it's something that everybody could do. And that was what I was curious to hear, was how you do that, because you can't, it's difficult to start with like these big broad strokes in terms of a cultural shift, so something like that makes a lot of sense. I love the whole thing about masks as well, because I think that a lot of these things, we know them innately. We know that we are different versions of ourselves in different situations. We know this. And when you raise that, it's not a new concept, but it might be refreshing for people to hear, that you can take your at-home persona to work, and you can be essentially and authentically you in all situations, But of course, that has to be modeled. And I never really thought about this, that the modeling of a leader by saying, by being this way, you're implicitly saying, this is how you need to be to get to my position. That's quite a powerful statement. I mean, it's something I never really considered before, but I think there's a lot of weight in that as well. It's interesting you talk about return on investment, because it's, we're at a point where it's not a dirty word, it's not, you're not commoditizing mental health. I mean, it's like, it's just, companies, they do need to think about this. Obviously we have we should be wanting to support our team altruistically, empathetically. That should be something that we want to do, but it's also, where do we put the money in training and things like that? And I mean, when you talk about return on investment, I mean, there can be no greater return. I mean, the teams I've seen with huge turnover, especially in an age where, we're no longer generations that join they go work for a bank and they stay there for 30 years like their parents did. I mean, people have opportunities. The world is bigger. They see different things. There's different ways of working. You can hop and change and, you know, and have the courage. It's modeled for us. And so companies just have to work so much harder to create a sense of belonging and psychological safety, as you say, which yields enormous results in people being the best version of themselves and therefore the best asset to a company. So it's almost like to me, you know, having seen it from the outside, it's like, okay, God, it's a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing more of this? But what do you think prevents people from, or organizations from, prioritizing this? You know, why is this still a thing? You know, that it has to be, you know, we have to actually take a sort of more extraordinary steps towards prioritizing mental health in the workplace. You know, what are the barriers to this? Is it fear? Is it people not taking it seriously, not really understanding it?
So fear is the word I was going to say, which is a big part of it. I think because, well, in my experience, we see again that fear around, if we make mental health more of a priority in the organization, is everyone going to come forward and say they're struggling? Is everyone suddenly going to go off work with poor mental health? Is it actually going to make a difference if we do invest kind of time and budget into this? But there's definitely that fear. We get that question a lot around what happens if, and it's the what if. It's like, what if we do this and it doesn't work? What if everyone goes off? And actually, in our experience, we've never seen that. When companies kind of prioritize having a really proactive mental health strategy, and we really encourage allowing employees to feel empowered as building the strategy with the company and kind of feeding into it. So that's a lot of the work we do. What we actually see when there's more investment in a mental health strategy and training is that, yes, you might get more people opening up and saying, actually, I've struggled with this in the past, I'm struggling with this right now. But actually what it means, like we were saying earlier, is that people can show up without the mask on. They can show up as, you know, their more authentic self. So actually what we see is there's less absenteeism over time. There's less presenteeism, which is essentially people showing up and kind of being there, but they're just kind of sitting at the desk for kind of feeling really, you know, for whatever reason, disconnected or demotivated or just unproductive. And yes, you see increased productivity as well. And the biggest piece, which is obviously a huge challenge right now, is that increase in talent retention. And that's like a huge focus for so many organizations, because like we were saying at the start, a lot of people over the last couple of years have actually questioned what value they're getting from the organization, or, you know, what drives them, or what they're really interested in, what they're passionate about. And, you know, working from home, it's hard because you aren't getting the same exact culture experience as being in an office. And that was a huge draw for a lot of people. So a lot of people obviously struggle working from home, and you really need, you were saying that sense of belonging before. That's the really challenging aspect of people working remotely right now, is having that sense of belonging and connection with their team and with their organization. And we're working a lot on that just now, just looking at how do you foster team belonging and connection, and how do you build that when someone's working remotely.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, because it's something that, you know, a lot of people are dealing with right now, and, you know, changing careers and you know, I mean, struggling with working at home, juggling the family thing, worrying about the motivation, the focus, you know, even just the physical environment of, like, some people are working in the same space that they actually also relax in. You know, so there's that, difficult to partition the kind of work and relax mentality, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. And then the wider scope of it, of feeling a sense of belonging, feeling connected, the toxic culture of presenteeism, like, you know, I feel like I should be at my desk, but yet I don't feel motivated, and I'm just sitting here, and it takes me 8 hours to do really what I could do in 1 hour if I was feeling great, and that feeds back into the anxiety, and it's a minefield, and it's happened so quickly. There's a lot of companies and a lot of people struggling with that. So what are some of the things you work on with organizations who are like, right, look, you know, we're likely going to stay remote, or we were already remote. How do we actually feel like a team when we're spread across time zones or cultures or whatever? How do we actually feel a sense of belonging? How do we be there for each other? You know, are we overplaying the importance of you know, a proximal connection? Can we be authentically there for each other online? You know, what are some of the areas that you work with on organizations who are trying to solve this these issues?
Yeah, so I think in terms of that kind of loneliness piece, that was on the rise before the pandemic. We've since then seen, you know, rates of loneliness shoot up through the roof for so many different reasons. But, you know, partly it can be linked to someone working remotely, especially if they don't feel like they've got that connection and belonging. And it's essentially looking at, you know, how do we look at the antidote to loneliness, which is creating that connection and belonging in a remote team or even a hybrid team. It can still feel hard to be connected in the same way. And it's slightly linked to the previous point around being able to ask the questions and check in regularly. But, you know, it's more about how do we create the spaces that we really hold for connection in the team. So, you know, at PVL, we're a fully remote team. We're based across the UK, the US. So it's really hard for us to kind of come together all in person very often. So for us, that was really important, building that for ourselves as well as our clients, because again, we want to know that it works for us before we tell other companies that actually this definitely works. So, and the spaces being held for a connection and like really deep connection, being able to ask those check-in questions and team meetings to really listen to each other, to all have like one-to-one meetings every week to just check in on the person rather than on the tasks that you're doing. That makes a huge difference. And just, again, building that culture to understand that you can show up and say that, you know, you're feeling lonely or you need to connect with someone. And, you know, that takes priority over kind of just focusing on tasks. And that's really hard when it's a big organization, because we're quite small at the moment in comparison to some of these big corporate companies. So it's about how in a big corporate company do you help people to feel that connection. And for us, we've been doing kind of sessions for teams where we hold the space for them. And we're really looking at asking them certain questions about, you know, how do they build connection in their lives, kind of normalizing the feeling of loneliness as well, because that's all part of it. And then using those check-in question examples that teams can then take away and do themselves. I saw in your article as well, you'd mentioned about flexibility, and that's been a huge thing for us, and we've seen it as a huge thing for other organizations, and helping with that, because it gives you the flexibility to really, you know, choose when you're kind of having your meetings, choose when you go out and do other things, which can reduce that sense of loneliness. For me, I know I can just prioritize my work around what else I want to do in the day, and it means that work doesn't feel like my sole focus for the day, and I don't feel like, oh, I need to sit at my desk, even though I'm not very productive. And I think we've all had days in our team as well where, you know, we do find it hard working from home sometimes, and I've sort of messaged my manager and said, you know, I just feel like I'm sitting at my desk not being very productive, and they're like, well, go for a walk, just take a couple of hours off, come back. If you want to talk about it, I'm here. And sometimes it's just that offer to be flexible, to have that conversation, that just totally, it removes that sense of feeling like I'm just doing my job, I'm just kind of sitting at my desk. It just lets you take some kind of power back, which is a huge part of people feeling like they're isolated or lonely at home. It feels like maybe they're chained to their desk, or they're not really getting that true sense of connection with people.
Yeah, I think that when I read sort of articles and stuff on this, there's a lot of focus on the, you know, what feel like very superficial elements. People saying things like, oh, you know, get up and put on your work clothes, so you feel like you're at work and stuff like that, you know, and organize your desk like this. And it's like, okay, but but what you're talking about is like, I mean, you know, we're talking about really rewiring the neural architecture around, you know, very firmly, deeply ingrained belief systems of the always on culture.
Yep.
Presenteeism, you mentioned, God, I hate that word. It's so toxic, but it's so very virulent. And it's like this idea that being present equals productivity is just something that has to be discarded. I mean, it's like, you know, And the thing that I think people maybe overlook sometimes is that just because you're in the office, I mean, if you think about all the distractions you have, you know, the all the conversations, the incident, bumping into coworkers, stopping for a wee coffee, checking this email or social media or whatever, you know, drifting way out the window, chatting with the guy at reception, you know, all of those things, but yet you don't necessarily feel the guilt at being less productive because you're present in the space. I am at work. Whereas transfer that to a home environment and it takes on this whole different context. And actually, you know, I've found that I can get so much done if I'm feeling good and feeling right, you know, I can get an amazing amount of work done in like 2 hours. But then the difficult thing for me is then giving myself permission to say, well, that's enough for today, you know? Whereas I might have achieved the same in an office in 8 hours with all the distractions and all that kind of stuff. But it's not giving yourself permission, isn't it? It's really, really, really difficult to do so, to say, what is the point of sitting at a desk just because there's this kind of expectation that you should be working, where actually you're just not the best version of yourself, and you're going to be far more productive if you just, go do something else. Come back when you're feeling it. So, I mean, what kind of good examples are you finding? Because that, you know, I'm still working on this. Really, I think a lot of people are really, really struggling with this. Especially, you know, the self-employed are no exception. I mean, I'm self-employed, and there's nobody expecting. It's me expecting it of myself. So, you know, it's not just even people working for bigger companies and teams. What kind of examples have you seen of, you know, you're working with different people in different organizations? What kind of things are you seeing them doing that are really making an appreciable difference to this situation? Any good examples?
Well, so I think the most important thing is that it needs to be, you know, it's not a one size fits all. Like there will be different examples because it needs to be what works for everyone, especially as you're saying, if people that are, you know, self-employed, there's no one kind of telling you what to do. It's very much about you creating your own habits. But we see in like the kind of not even bigger organizations, but just any that important piece around leading by example comes back in again for teams of, you know, if there's a culture of you being expected to kind of be always on, it's really hard for you to create those boundaries for yourself to say, I'm switching off at, you know, 5:30 or 6 if the expectation from your manager is actually you need to answer your phone at 9 o'clock at night if I phone you. So that's a really important part as well, of just as leaders leading by example for your teams. Like in our team, we have it in terms of, you know, Petra, for example, sometimes does start really early. I sometimes start really early. She'll sometimes work really late, but it's always that kind of voiced, I guess, expectation of the team to do whatever works for them. So for example, Petra might start early or work late, but I know she often finishes quite early on a Friday to kind of spend time with her kids, and it's kind of all balanced out, whereas I sort of have the flexibility around, I might start early, then go to the gym mid-morning, and have that balance for me. It's really kind of it's a real mix of whatever you want to work for you, I think. And the biggest challenge we see for that is that culture piece again of, is there an expectation of you to be always on? Like we had, it was a while ago, we had someone we spoke to in HR was saying that her biggest challenge and the reason she felt like she was kind of burning out and feeling really stressed was that, you know, she felt like when she was putting her kid to bed at like 8:30 at 9 at night, she could hear her Teams notifications going off and she knows she needs to go back to answer them. So she's like reading you know, she's reading a book to her kid, wanting to be really present with her, and she's hearing her Teams notification going off. So it's that balance of, okay, we need to address that cultural aspect, but equally we said, you know, from a personal point of view, can you switch those notifications off when you're doing that? Can you switch them off and, you know, at least address that part so you're present in whichever task or activity you're doing outside of work? So it's having the boundaries for yourself, and sometimes for people it's about being really strict and voicing them. So I'll often say in our team, like, I'm doing this at this time in the morning, I'm not going to be online for an hour. Otherwise I might just be like, oh, actually I could just catch up with something on work and just not create the space for myself at lunchtime or to go to the gym. So sometimes voicing it and asking your team to keep you accountable is really important as well.
It must make a huge difference to know that, for example, Petra on a Friday is prioritizing being present with her family. I mean, that I don't think we can really understate the importance of leadership in this, isn't it? I mean, setting personal boundaries. So your example with the HR professional with the notifications on Teams, certainly setting boundaries and saying, or even just switching them off is really important. But I think a lot of people will understand that feeling of, I just don't feel I can. And it's that it comes back to that weight of cultural expectation, that other people are involved in that conversation, other people are answering, and you can almost feel the presence of that expectation to reply. Really difficult to get around that, and difficult for people to almost stand out and draw attention to themselves by saying, I want to do things differently. I'm not going to be answering my phone after 6 or 7, and it's really tough. I mean, it is really tough, and I mean, it's good to hear you talking about the the balance thing, because it might come down to, because we're kind of reconfiguring things and reconfiguring this 9 to 5 mentality, which it doesn't work with home working at all. I like that you talked about the communication aspect. It's almost like communication is this kind of capital that we have to use wisely. And so rather than, we don't all have unlimited time, and, the bigger the team as well, we've all got stuff to do. And so we don't have time to kind of be, checking in, having lots of different meetings all the time. But it sounds like what you're saying is use it wisely. So for example, not checking in to be like, how are you doing with your tasks? Like, can we think of another way to do that? We have the technology, we've got Slack and Trello and whatever, all these project management tools. I can glance at it and see your comments and see where you are in this project. So, I mean, you're saying that instead of doing the check-in thing about, measuring and checking it on productivity, that we're actually just using that to be like on a human level. How you doing? Just shooting the breeze a little bit and keeping that connection alive. Do you think that's one of the fundamental ways, is shifting the task reporting to something maybe digital, maybe, but using the face-to-face communication for more human stuff? Do you think that's a good piece of advice? Or
yeah, and I mean, we do both, because obviously the productivity is really important, and I guess we don't really see it as like productivity, but I'll sort of have like client check-in meetings with my team, or operations check-ins with some of the team. But it's very much about, for us, we have like a space at the start and the end of our team meeting where we check in as people without jumping straight into tasks. Right. And we have like a Monday check-in where whoever wants to join can check in, and we just check in as people. I kind of have it in most of my meetings with my team, where there's just even like a few minutes at the start to be like, how's your mental health today? What's one thing you're finding challenging? And some of our like team meeting check-ins at the start, we kind of focus them around all of our team values in some way. So we kind of cross our 4 values, and one of them is lightness and humor. So sometimes it will be like a 10-minute check-in at the start of a team meeting just on something really ridiculously random, like we'll just do Pictionary as a team, like online, or we'll do like, someone has to like collect stories from the team and read them all out, and you have to guess who this childhood story is about. It's all these like tiny little things which just create a sense of like real connection in the team, that we're not just jumping straight into tasks, we're actually finding out things about each other as a remote team, or kind of going deeper into.
What's the result of that? I mean, do you find that people they're better versions of themselves after this? Do you feel like an energy? You talk about uplifting conversations before. I mean, and I'm raising this because I know there will be people out there listening to it and thinking about that it's tokenistic, this kind of it's like this idea of like team building exercises and stuff like that. But you're talking about it being more of the fabric of what you do. It's not tokenistic, it's part of the fabric. What's the return on that? Do you feel like people the energy changes in the team as a result of these investments?
Yeah, And I think it needs to be embedded in your culture. So it's not very much, we'll just do like a 5-minute check-in, then go into kind of, I don't know, like some sort of difficult culture where you feel like you can't speak up. Like our whole culture is around anyone can speak up at any point. We're very much equal in our opinions. You can sort of challenge ideas in a really psychologically safe culture. And I think that's the key. It's, our whole culture is very psychologically safe, and we're all feeding into it and feeding back. I think that's a big thing we highlighted over the past year, that our team, with being remote, we want to be feeding back to each other as much as possible. What can we do better? What actually feels like the best team meeting setup? What value are you getting out of these 5-minute check-ins? Could they be better? So it's very much letting people feed into what the culture looks like. And I think that's what makes it really powerful. But I mean, we had someone join our team last month. And he said he used to be in the military about 6 years ago, and he'd fed back to us this month that it was the first time he felt like he was part of a team since being in the military 6 years ago. And he's obviously never met us in real life. It's just from working with us online. So it's those small actionable steps every day, rather than just the big one-off team building days. I think that's really what we're trying to focus on, is the consistency of checking in every week. And for those bigger organizations that we work with, we say it's very much about going back to those mental health awareness days. It's like, actually, let's just kind of cut through the crap of mental health. Like, let's look at what's your mental health strategy, what's your mission for the next 3 to 5 years for mental health in the organization. And then we do a lot of when we're helping them build that strategy, it's about, okay, let's actually get employees from all levels and all areas and all locations of the business feeding into this. Because then we do, things like focus groups, and we actually hear from employees, what's the biggest challenge? Why is this not going to work? And that's, that's a good example. They might say, oh, it feels like actually we're saying we do all these things, but we're not really, walking the talk. And that's really good feedback to then look at, okay, in our strategy, how are we going to make sure that's not a challenge anymore? How are we going to be addressing that through leading by example from leaders, but also through employees engaging in different ways? Do you have, mental health champions across the business that are really spreading this strategy and making it come to life and build momentum? And that's a really important piece, is making sure it's the actionable steps every day, so that it doesn't just feel like, we're just doing this to tick a box.
This is great. I mean, this is like the merging of these worlds. It's like, I feel like, the way you guys are doing it is hugely beneficial, because it's like, you're using the language that businesses understand. You're talking about strategy and strategy supportive cultures. You're talking about indicators. You're talking about, accountability, mental health champions. I mean, none of this is tokenistic. None of it is, there's a sustainability aspect to it as well. It's like you're mainstreaming an investment in mental health. You're making it not an aside or a project, or if there's a problem, see this person, but it's mainstreamed in the culture itself, which is, and it leads me to just one of my last questions, or my last question really is just, you mentioned earlier, and I think it's important to highlight, it's not a one size fits all approach. I mean, people are, every organization is a tapestry. There's a fluidity, and that's as it should be. Mental health is not one thing or another. Organizations are not one thing or another. But with that said, there must be kind of generalized indicators of health, mental health, in a workplace. And you've mentioned what I think might be one of them, that you can challenge opinions and feel psychological safety and not feel like there's any kind of challenge to the ego going on there. You feel like, hey, we can depersonalize an idea because we're on a common mission. We're on a shared journey here. It's about the idea. It's not about the fact that you suggested it. We got to be able to distance ourselves, which seems, I mean, I'd never take that for granted in an organization. That's a huge asset to actually have a culture like that. What other indicators would you say, if you're looking at, an assessment of how a culture is in terms of its, mental health or its supportiveness of mental health? Are there other things you would look for across the board as indicators of a healthy culture?
Yeah, so I think this is part of the fear of investing in the first place, because a lot of organizations will just look at it as a really intangible, untrackable kind of piece of work if you're investing in mental health, whereas actually, you know, when we work with them, they actually have a lot of the data there already that we can use. So it's looking at things like, you know, in terms of, you know, we spoke at the start about things like mental health first aiders or having an employee assistance program. A lot of the companies will have those already. They'll all have data for how often are people actually accessing those resources. Are people using the mental health first aiders? Are they using like the crisis end support, basically? And we can obviously track what that means in terms of are people actually using the support that's there. And you can just see things like, obviously we can look at absence reports, and are people going off with stress? Are they going off with poor mental health? Do we actually get a sense of whether people are even indicating if it's mental health? Because obviously part of the stigma is a lot of people will say they're off with something else, but actually it could be stress or poor mental health related as well. And then kind of looking at things like the survey results that already exist, and we do survey results as part of all of our training as well, just to see what people feel about, you know, can they go to their line manager? Do they feel like they can get support? Do people in the organization know where to get support? So often you'll get, say, like 70% of an organization say, no, we don't know where to go for support. Well, that's a challenge we can address as part of the strategy right away.
Right.
There's lots of results that are already there. And then for us, it's very much about, throughout our training and our strategy, checking in to see throughout the process, is that changing? Do people feel like challenges that aren't being addressed, can we feed them into the strategy? It's very much about making the seemingly intrackable more trackable and more tangible. And you know, really what we see over, and we've seen it in the companies we've worked with kind of year on year, we see, you know, if we're tracking like the stress rates of people in a team or an organization, that goes down, or does the absence rate go down, or the absence for mental health or poor mental health go down? All these things are there and they're trackable, and we partner with another company as well that can essentially measure the resilience versus burnout of an organization. So we can do that year on year, and that goes really deep into the essentially mapping out the mental health of your organization and looking at, okay, in this location or this area, the stress levels are actually much higher than the average for the organization. Let's dig into why that is. Why is this team or this location doing really well compared to that one? What are they doing differently? So it's really kind of using all this proactive, you know, data and tracking, and as well as that, having more of the conversations. Like our focus groups are amazing for just getting a real ground level sense of what are the real challenges in the organization. And how do we embed them in the strategy and really address them? That's the kind of the difficult part, and the hardest thing is really starting. Once you actually start getting the feedback and start embedding the strategy, like people want to feed into it and they want to see it make a change. So the hardest part is just considering all the what ifs and the fear and just diving in. I think that's the hardest part.
So you must work with organizations for, I mean, I guess, I mean, some will want a workshop and some will want a course, but there must be quite a lot of long-term partnerships. No, I mean, these things don't change overnight. If an organization is really serious, and, you know, to be honest, and I think increasingly people would agree with this, that what better thing to invest in, you know, in an age where, I mean, look what, on just a purely practical level, look what retention, the benefits of retention, you know, of retaining talent and developing talent, of having people feeling like they can speak up and contribute, and people are able to listen, you know, so that the ideas, you know, that there's this open channel of feedback in the organization, so you can quickly check and change things that aren't working, and you know, make the organization more agile. I mean, all of this stuff is just, you know, super important for businesses to be competitive, and yet it's very strange to me that they wouldn't, you know, that there would be a fear of investing in mental health, having heard these arguments, you know, and having really thought about this, because as you say, you're talking about things like looking at illness rates, or, you know, people absence rates, and so much of that you know, the mental health will just go hidden, won't it? I mean, people are just taking days off and saying they're sick or whatever, or other reasons are coming out. But what it really is mental health. It's just not going, you know, it's not being reported because of the culture is just simply not there.
Yeah.
So probably they don't even quite realize, you know, in a lot of cases what the issues are. I mean, all of these things, it sounds like it's quite a long-term thing to work with organizations. I mean, in your experience, do you tend to work with the organizations who really are serious about, you know, making this a mainstream part of their strategy? Do you tend to work with them for months, years?
Yeah, it's a mix, like you said, in terms of some companies we partner with mostly on, you know, maybe leadership training or all employee training or support. But a lot of the organizations that we partner with longer term, it's very much on a sort of strategic consulting basis of we're helping you to really map out what exists already, what are the gaps, what are the challenges, what's the culture like right now, and how do we actually help you start where you're at and build a mental health strategy that, you know, you don't just build it, announce it to the company and it just sits there in some document. It's very much, how do we make this a living breathing of the organization? How does everyone on every level feed into this? How do we kind of consult with you afterwards once you've embedded it to see actually what are the gaps now? How do we keep building this? But, you know, I kind of see it as, with the strategic consulting, I kind of see it as like, if you have a personal trainer, you shouldn't really have them forever. You know, ideally we'll work with a company for a couple of years. There might be parts where they might launch a new thing and they want to bring us back in. But ideally, long term, what we want to see is companies that have embedded the culture so that we can come in with the training and the support, and they've got that overall strategy and culture in place. Ideally, they're not partnering with us, you know, for 5-6 years and not seeing any change. We want to really help them build momentum, and then they go off by themselves and they can all do it, and they have, you know, the champions in the organization that are really rolling out the strategy in every location. So ideally that's what we want to see long term, is that they don't need us. Amen
to that. So there's a real kind of focus of empowerment and agency. I mean, it's not good for anybody, is it, to create a culture of dependency, where they're, you know, you're kind of drip feeding services in a way, and you know, there's that you know, things aren't blossoming, because then that's not very good for anybody. So really a mark of success in PVL would be that they no longer need you, right? You know, they're able to take things forward themselves, and as you say, you know, you come back in for, well, let's shore up this bit, let's add this idea, let's plant this seed, let's, you know,
let's train these new leaders. Exactly.
So you're kind of, it's more of an incidental involvement or episodic involvement. You just before we go, you mentioned values. I'm always curious about this. What are the 4 values that you have in the team? Did you say humor was one of them?
Yes. So one of them is lightness and humor, and that's, so with any of our values, we want them to really be embedded in, you know, everything we do essentially. So lightness and humor is a huge kind of difference we see between kind of our approach and kind of the bigger focus on, I guess, like the struggling end of mental health. We want people to be having those uplifting conversations and really connecting with each other. So lightness and humor is one of them. And there's bravery, human connection, and responsibility and action. So it was great because as a team, we came together to kind of, as we got bigger, we decided actually, let's just decide what our 4 values are. Let's put all these behaviors underneath them so that it's more easy to essentially see, like, are we kind of living and breathing these 4 values? And that's very much all these values we want to be able to embed in the way we work with clients, kind of how we train them, our approach when we speak with them. So it's great when we get feedback that they're kind of seeing all of that in the training and the work we do.
I think, and that's going to be very positively received by people, I think, because, you know, the fear maybe around mental health is that the conversations are dark and heavy and serious, and you know, must worry people as well, because it's one thing saying, you know, to leaders, hey, ask your team, how's your mental health today? But it's not great if you're terrified of the answer, you know, and then it's like, what do I do now? And just diffusing that. I mean, the Scottish are very good at that, aren't we? You know, of using humor as kind of a way to diffuse the situation and just kind of turn it around a little bit. I mean, yeah, we have a bit of a dark sense of humor actually, so maybe as a coping mechanism, but it's nice to see. I don't think I've ever seen humor as a core value in an organization, and that intrigues me actually. I'm glad to see it, you know, and it's usually integrity and blah blah, thing, but humor is absolutely important. It's so important. It's a way of connecting with people as well. So, and it might take some of the scariness away as well. People hearing that and thinking, actually, you're using the word upliftment. These are not words associated with some of the stigma around mental health and how people frame how that might be. If we walk down this path, you don't automatically think humor and upliftment, do you? So
yeah, exactly.
You are reframing it.
Yeah, we're reframing it. And it's also about, for lightness and humor, like a good example for us is how we embed that in our team is, if something goes wrong, like if we just, if something hasn't been done quite right with me, with a client, or I don't know, like someone on our team forgets something, it's like, how do we actually just embrace that with like lightness of, okay, that's great, what do we do next? It's not about like, who do we blame, who's responsible? It's very much about, we can embrace that with lightness and humor. And that also happens when we open up with each other as well. It's like, if someone does open up about struggling, which I'm sure we all have in the past 2 years, it's about how do we really support that person, but it doesn't feel really heavy. It's like, how do we bring a lightness to it where it's like, okay, how can I help you still have those like light conversations with them? It doesn't suddenly feel like, oh, I don't know what to say because they're struggling. It's like, how do we just connect as humans?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, so somebody does something wrong or makes a mistake or whatever. I mean, it's as you say, there's no point in addressing that with more blame. They're already blaming themselves. They're already figuring out, putting, torturing themselves sometimes over it. I've made this mistake. How will I do better? Nobody else needs to add to that. The same way when somebody's struggling, we don't need to add to that with more darkness. And so lightness perhaps is a double meaning there, that it's just that there's a way out of this. Let's just take some of the pressure off and share a moment. I mean, I think that's hugely empowering, and it's great to talk to you today, Emma, and hear your reframing of mental health. I think people that are listening might have really picked up some interesting stuff there in terms of the sort of the practical, pragmatic aspect of mainstreaming it in business strategy, of the benefits, obviously, of clear benefits of investing in it beyond just altruism, but just when it comes down to the nuts and bolts, which is how it has to be in business sometimes. It's like, how does this look on an Excel? Unfortunately, we have to have those conversations, and it's not a commoditization of it as well. It's just purely communicating the fact that it makes sense on every single level. Every single indicator, it's something that is going to have a return. So I think that's coming through kind of loud and clear. And just want to say thanks for sharing the insights as well. I think the more we have conversations like this, the more it certainly can't hurt, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah. And what are you going to do now, just out of interest?
I'm going to go a walk now because it's actually sunny, and I'm like staring out the window like, oh my goodness, is this real?
Sunny in Glasgow, yeah, you got to go for a walk. Yeah, it's actually getting a little cloudy in the Highlands, but honestly, we've been pretty indulgent the last couple of days. So yeah, we've had our time. So Glasgow gets a turn now.
Glasgow does. Yeah, it's great. But yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emma. And it's for people that are curious, it's pvl.com, isn't it?
So the actual website is petravelzibor.com.
Petra Velzibor, that's right.
And yeah, it's PVL on LinkedIn.
Petra Velzibor. Okay. I'll put that in the description as well, just if people are curious about it as well. So thank you so much for your time, and go and enjoy the Glasgow sun, because we all know it doesn't happen very often.
Yep. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Emma. Take care now.